something like that. I figured I'd like finish the
jump
stint.
right in there, just don't finish that. Try it again.
Try again. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Nils Mindnich here. I am with
Alex Quitiquit.
And today we're going to be talking about anchors, what to do, what not to do, and what your options are.
Great. So the first anchor that we're going to show you is your typical sport anchor, which we're going to use just 2 quick draws. This scenario for an anchor is what you would use if you're climbing with a partner and you're just going to do maybe a couple laps on that route, where you're not going to end up hanging out there and you don't have a bunch of people who are just going to run laps on it, where you're maybe doing a burn or 2. So we're just going to use 2 quick draws. Just make sure that they're equal length, and it's better if they're the same draw so that you know that they're equal length. And then the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to want to clip these with the gates opposite and opposing. And you'll see when you link them together, the gates are going to be facing out and opposite of themselves. And that gives you that security that the rope doesn't have the chance if they are both to flip out one side. So there's that added security that they're on both sides. So then when the rope's running through the carabiners, and you get to the top, you're going to set this anchor up and you're going to clip both quick draws. They'll come together, and so they're equalized, and this is how the rope's going to run through.
Yeah, and you can kind of see with the carabiner orientation that it's pretty secure in there, and you're not really going to be jumbling around the gates or have anything bad happen with that rope. And again, like, this is really common if you're lowering off sport climbs, right? That would kind of be the main place I've used it personally, is especially if I'm not top roping, if I'm kind of just using it for like one lower off.
Exactly. It's simple, it's efficient. All you have to do is take 2 quick draws, clip it onto the bolts at the top. We'll be using 2 bolts as our main anchor today. And ultimately, you don't want to have this be a anchor that you're going to have people running laps on, because over time you're going to wear through these quick draws. And quick draws are meant to primarily be your protection as you're going up a sport route. So using them as an anchor piece, like, you're going to add more wear and tear because the rope is going to run through these for the entire length of the route.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
So the next anchor we're going to show you is a very similar anchor in that we're going to be using 2 quick draws, but this one is a little bit of a hybrid in that we're going to be adding in a locking quick draw. This is a setup where you'd buy 2 locking carabiners, you take a dog bone or an old quick draw, and you're going to replace the non-locking carabiners with 2 locking carabiners. So you're going to do the same thing you did with the other setup, where you're going to place the quick draws opposite and opposing, and one of them is going to be a locking setup. You're going to lock the upper draw, clip your rope in, lock the lower carabiner, and then you've got a very similar setup. This one would be if you're maybe doing 2 or 3 burns on the same route. You potentially want to do this setup because you're going to be using an isolated and more safe, secure locking carabiner as one of your pieces of main contact with the rope. It's also going to be that you're generally not going to use this locking carabiner setup as a piece to go sport climbing. So you're going to know that this carabiner is taking some of that wear versus both the carabiners of 2 non-locking quick draws.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, like, a lot of the locking carabiners as well. So like, you have like, the gates aren't going to open. So if you're moving around or something, they're not going to open up on you. But also oftentimes they're a much more robust carabiner, right? And so for when you're kind of having a majority of the load taken on that carabiner, it's going to wear through a bit slower than your fancy little sport climbing.
Exactly. Try to find a carabiner, maybe an HMS, with a larger size locking carabiner, and have that be the master point at the bottom here so that it's taking more of that load. So in this orientation, with using the locking quick draw, one of the things that is something that you want to consider is to try to find an orientation where the combination of the 2 lockers actually makes the draw slightly shorter than your normal non-locking quick draw. The reason for that is that you want the locking carabiner here on the bottom at the master point to be taking a little bit more of the load. So you want that to actually be shorter and to be taking more of the load. You do want them to be fairly close. You want them to be equalized to some degree. so that you're getting the load from both bolts. But if the locking carabiner is slightly a little bit higher, they don't necessarily need to be exactly even. That's beneficial. What you don't want to do is have the non-locking quick draw be the one that's actually taking more of the brunt.
Yeah, you're gonna wear through it a lot faster. All right, so the next one we're gonna get into is a Cordelette Master Point. Now, this would be something that you would most likely use for a trad climbing scenario, or if you're maybe setting up a more long-term top roping belay station. So what you do is you again will have 2 locking carabiners, gates.
Opposite and opposing.
Gates opposite and opposing. Always keep that in mind. And then you'll come in and you grab this point between the 2 carabiners and you will pull it down. And it's just good to keep in mind where your knot is going to end up at so that
you want to cinch that up close to the one of the carabiners so that it's out of the way.
Yep. And then you'll do good old-fashioned overhand on a bite. Then you'll have another locking carabiner to then set up your master point on.
And to add a little bit of redundancy, some people will add a second locking carabiner to the master point. Again, it's just nice to do it opposite and opposing. This also helps not only with redundancy and security, but it'll help on the resistance and the wear on that one carabiner. You'll split the load.
Yeah, exactly. And especially like something with this would be very, like this is very like top rope oriented.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
if you're gonna have maybe your family's out or you're taking out a group of people climbing for the first time and it's just gonna be a top rope belay for the entire day. This system is super robust, so yes, it's very safe. They're all safe, but you're gonna be wearing down your carabiners a lot slower.
Cool, and then the other part about this anchor that is a reason for setting it up with this overhand on a bite master point. Let's say that the route that you're climbing at the top anchor is 2 bomber bolts. Really, the chance of one of these bolts failing is pretty low, but let's say, for example, like for some reason this bolt decided that it had the end of its life and it said no more. What's nice about this anchor system is that if this bolt failed, you're not actually going to get much of a shock load onto the anchor when that one would fail because you're master pointed off so that your resistance is going to be in line with the other anchor.
Yeah. Having 2 bolts this perfectly placed together isn't extremely common either. And what's nice about setting up a system like this is that if, let's say the bolts are in a different place, you can then have a much more equalized system compared to if you're using just 2 quick draws. So you can see here in this scenario that we still have a nice equalized anchor and both bolts are being weighted.
Where if we were to set up this same setup with 2 quick draws and especially 2 short quick draws like I'm showing, you're definitely not going to have an equal load with these 2 draws. And it's definitely not going to be centered if the climber is coming up over here and they end up climbing on this side. You're going to see that the rope is going to start pulling on this quick draw way more than this other one. So ultimately, this is a better setup to equalize 2 bolts that are potentially uneven. The last point is that when you're tying this overhand on a bite and you're setting up this master point, is that you want to be conscious of the direction of the climb and try to orient that knot somewhat in the direction. So if the climber is coming straight down from the anchor, it's perfect to just set it up like this. If, for example, the climber is coming from more on this side, you want to have it so that you're pulling and tightening the knot in that direction so that ultimately the load equalizes somewhat off an angle and not straight down. And so if the climber is coming straight down, you're going to see that this is actually loading one of the bolts more than the other. And again, like the big takeaway is that you want to just try to create the most uniform load you can on the bolts because that way you're going to utilize the power. Full strength
of each bolt.
Cool. And so the other anchor that we're going to show you with the Cordelette is just a different way to equalize the setup. And we're going to use what's called a sliding or a Magic X. So how that's done is same thing. You'd clip the anchor with the cordelette to both bolts using locking carabiners. Same thing, you're gonna grab up in the top and the middle. You're gonna bring that down, and as you bring it down, you're actually gonna make a twist, create a small X, or an X in the cord down here with that small twist. And then you're going to clip your master point to that X. And what's nice about this is that, as we were mentioning, let's say that the climb is a little bit more low angle and it's kind of a more choose your own adventure type of climb, where you're gonna have climbers that are maybe going left to right, or there's angles or
pitching out fourth class terrain.
Exactly, something a little bit more mellow. You're gonna, what's nice about the sliding X is that it will automatically equalize to wherever the load is. It just makes it so that you're getting you're using equal force from both the bolts at the top. Going back to what we showed in the master point, is that let's say that one of these bolts failed for whatever reason, or for some reason it came unclipped. The downfall of the sliding X is that you're gonna end up shock loading that cord completely, which is not ideal. Fortunately, there's a lot of things built into climbing systems that will ultimately help resist against this cordelette breaking. But let's say you're using an old cordelette, or this bolt is also bad, or your rope is used or to some form. There's a chance that you could shock load that system and have something fail.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the sliding X is good in its application in that it equalizes and it's simple to set up.
Yep.
But it does have its downfall in that it's potentially going to shock load the system. For example, let's say that you are building a anchor on a multi-pitch climb, and you ended up having to place a piece of Pro as one of your anchors, where we're using this stopper as one of the pieces. And then there's a bolt as the other piece. And as you can see, like, stoppers are generally, when they're placed correctly, they're fairly bomber, right? But in this case, like, let's say that for some reason this stopper decided to walk itself out and shock loads, you're gonna run into the problem that we were just discussing, in that you're going to force shock load the system.
Yeah, so pros, if the route wanders a lot and you kind of need the anchor to be equalizing in a variety of places.
Right.
Cons is that if you are in a higher risk situation, you do run a bit more of a risk if a bolt were to blow out.
Cool.
Great. The rope.
You're gonna like this one.
Got some trad wizardry coming your way. You've just sent your lifetime project. It's
Climbing
super
up.
chossy.
You're doing a multi-pitch climb with your partner. You're climbing up. You get to the belay station. You're super stoked. You just sent the pitch. Now it's time to set up the anchor so that you can bring your partner up, and then you're going to continue on. So this setup is using specifically just the rope to build the anchor. And what we're going to do is we're going to simplify this so that I can show you how to build this setup, so that then when your partner comes up, you can swap leads and the partner can carry on. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take an extension of the rope and find exactly like the length from where you're standing at the belay station to the bolt that is closest to you, and then you kind of want to put the second piece of anchor or the other bolt kind of towards where your partner is going to be coming up, and you want it so that the center between the two anchors is equalized towards where your partner is climbing. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take a locking carabiner, clip it to that first bolt, and then you're going to set yourself up with a clove hitch on that first bolt and tension that down. And what's nice about a clove hitch is that you can adjust the clove hitch so that if, let's say, I'm standing on a little ledge and when I first clipped it in, it's like, oh, it's not long enough and I actually want to stand back here and I can't get there. You can extend the clove hitch without unclipping it. By pushing rope slack through, extending it out, boom, I've got a little bit more slack to get comfortable.
Just such like a universal, easy to use, reliable way to build an anchor. Like, it's fast, it uses the resources you already have.
Exactly.
And like the idea that you can adjust it so quickly is awesome.
It's super efficient in that sense, and then you can make quick adjustments to it in length and sorry, the next part of this is that you're then going to clip the other anchor with a locking carabiner. And then you're going to get about 2 to 3 feet between the master point where I'm connected, the anchor port where I'm connected, about 3 more feet, create another clove hitch, clip that carabiner, cinch it off, lock that carabiner, and then you're going to see that you've then created a loop of rope between this carabiner, that's me, and the other carabiner that's the other side of the anchor. And then just like the Cordelette anchor, you're gonna do a figure 8 or a overhand on a bite, create a master point. That master point is then going to become your anchor by adding a locking carabiner. You then clip your belay device to this. But let's say that we're just belaying from above, clipping the rope to it, bringing the partner up along the way. Let's say that, as Nils mentioned, that you needed to adjust this in some form and that this is too much slack. What's easy to do is that you can undo it, cinch this up just by feeding slack through, pull on the other side, making the loop smaller. You can make a pretty tight master point with this so that if you're belaying using guide mode, you're tight, concise, you're belaying the partner up. What also is nice about this setup is that this rope is meant to take falls. It's meant to be dynamic. It's meant to be shock loaded to some degree. And what's super nice about this is that this system is using the rope in its entirety. Versus the other systems we were showing or using cord or slings is that these cords are generally like pretty static. They don't have much stretch to them. We do have some nylon webbing slings here that do have some more give to them. They will stretch. But ultimately the rope, by having this, if let's say for example that I ended up I was reaching over here to grab something or slipped off the belay ledge and I shock loaded this anchor. What's nice is that I've got the rope, which technically can take that stretch and that elongation and won't end up shock loading this anchor. So let's say that you get to a belay station and fortunately the people who equipped this route,
they were swimming in anchors.
They're swimming in anchors and they ended up putting 3 bolts for us, which is always great to see.
Lucky you.
I'm gonna show you using the rope how to build this same anchor setup with using 3 bolts. So same as before, give yourself a decent amount of slack between this and this carabiner, create a clove hitch, and you're gonna clip that. The next is that from the length of rope that then comes down to the climber again, about 2 to 3 feet, another clove hitch, clip the other bolt and the other locking carabiner. The next is then you're gonna take these two loops, pull them together, and now you've got somewhat sliding X. You are kind of pinned off on this center bolt here. But now you have a master point that's utilizing all 3 of these bolts, which is super nice. Cool. So that's building an anchor using the rope. Final notes, as we talked about, a lot of the systems that we set up had a master point, and ultimately that master point should be a locking carabiner. I like to use a larger barreled carabiner, such as an HMS. This is from Black Diamond. There's multiple iterations of these carabiners from a bunch of brands: Petzl, Camp, Black Diamond. So ultimately, the one thing that you want to look for is wear and tear on your master points. At some point, you will wear these through, especially if your rope's dirty, like Nils's rope here, which is covered in paint and dirt. If your rope has dirt on it, if you think about like rubbing sand up against anything, let's say glass, sandpaper.
Like a paper versus sandpaper.
It's gonna tear through things very fast. So if your rope is dirty, dirt is ultimately sand. It's gonna wear through metal as well. So you're gonna look for grooves, and as you can see on this one, we've got some grooves that are already started to form here. And as soon as those grooves get some depth to them, and if they especially get sharp angles to them, that's when you know you're gonna wanna replace your locking carabiner.
Yeah, and again, it's, you see grooves pretty quickly in your carabiners, but essentially when you really start to get, you can run your finger on the edge of your carabiner. As soon as there starts to be
those notches,
a little bit of a notch, a little bit of an edge, then it's definitely time to replace your carabiner.
So one of the things that we'd also like to call out is that you should always check your anchors. If you're setting up a top rope, or if you're belaying from the top, or any time that you're setting up an anchor, is that the first thing you need to do is actually check to make sure that your anchors are secure. A lot of people will just trust bolts inherently.
Yeah.
A lot of bolts have been out there for 20, 30 years.
Long time.
Sport climbing came on in the 80s and the 90s, and some of those sport routes haven't been re-equipped. There's been great organizations around the country, including the SLCA here locally, that have replaced a bunch of anchors for us, which has been fantastic. So donate to your local climber organization. the first thing that I always do is I always just visually inspect the bolts.
Yep.
Do they look like they're in good, solid condition? Is the orientation in a way that I can actually build an anchor in a sufficient way? That also would determine whether or not you're going to use a quick draw or you're going to use Cordelette. So as you can see, like Nils just flipped this bolt hanger in the sense that it's oriented in a way that we can still use it, but it's going to cross-load one of the accesses of the hanger. And sometimes you'll see that bolts will actually be loose. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely bunk, but you want to be conscious of that and know that ultimately maybe the screw needs to be tightened down.
Yep.
And there's not anybody out there that's just going to do that for you. So you have to take control of this, especially if it's outside. You got to make sure that you're making sure that you're checking yourself, making sure that the bolts are solid, and then building your anchor.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's kind of on brand with a lot of things in climbing, right? Is that to have a good time and go climbing, you also accept a lot of responsibility. And that's things like making sure that from the moment you tie your knot, it's correct. And then until you completely finish the process and you get to the anchors, also be inspecting your gear and your rope and the anchors at the end of the day as well to make sure that you're making all the correct decisions and you're gonna have a good time.
Exactly. So those are some tips and tricks on anchor building. If you like this video, like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any other additional questions, please reach out to a gearhead.
In the meantime, have fun. I'll see you out there.